So again, thank you so much for coming. And I'd like to start this week setting, recollecting and setting our motivation. From our side, we want to become the best person we can, not because we wish for fame or wealth or glory, but because we want to be able to serve all beings as best as we're able, regardless of our own personal situation, however hard we are struggling. Being able to become a better person for everybody is always a good thing. It's never going to be, it's very hard to criticize as a motive. Recognizing that Buddhahood is the final goal of being as good as we can be, and recognizing our teachers, who both Buddha and also those who followed in Buddha's words, we take refuge in them, and dedicate ourselves to engaging in enlightening activity. And today, to think clearly about saying, during this session anyway, for the next 90 minutes, to try and use this opportunity to think about, reflect upon, and to enhance my understanding of the path. I might disagree with Ben, that's okay, but at the same time, to do so in a way which helps me in my journey, rather than for academic purposes. So like that. Again, this purpose really is to help. Normally is done with Sangye Jodangma, or a ritual prayer, but it's more important really to try and find something in our mind. And last week we were talking about the meditation session and the structure of meditation session. Before that, we were talking about relying upon a teacher. I didn't finish the meditation session, so we're going to do a bit more of that. And then we're going to go into the next chapter, which is Refuting Misconceptions about Meditation. Now, that will be chapter 6. So what we did cover so far was primarily how to prepare for the meditation session. And we talked in brief about how to meditate, specifically the text set it out for how to meditate on Guru Yoga or relying on a teacher. But this was to be indicative of how to structure a metaphor for how to structure meditation on any of the topics of the Lam Rim. So then the other thing is to say that between the sessions, and this is really where we left off last week, I got quite excited about this again, how to behave, so how to practice, how to be a practitioner, not just in meditation, but also between meditation sessions. And later on in the next chapter, Je Rinpoche will say, it's very important not to have a wrong view, a mistaken view, which is our practice stops at the cushion. Yeah. In fact, our practice is continuing all the time, and that's important for us. If we want to actually make a difference to our lives, is if we think, oh, all we need to do is to do our meditation session, we're missing the point. The point of the meditation is to change our lives, not just to sit quietly for half an hour and keep out of everybody's way, right? So we need to be able to see that change in our lives. Now, I think maybe last week or the week before, I said that there was vigilance and there's mindfulness, and really they're the same. There's a slight difference between the two, according to Lama Tsong-kha-pa. Vigilance, mindfulness really is, Lama Tsong-kha-pa talks about this as not forgetting what we're doing. So a non-forgetfulness for why we are here or what we're trying to achieve. And that's not necessarily just Buddhahood. Yeah, it's also specifically what I'm planning on doing right now. So in the early sutras, the Pali Sutras, Lord Buddha talks about saying, now I am standing, now I'm sitting, as a part of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And here what we're talking about is the same, is the idea of recognize what we are doing now and how that is, that we're doing it in a way which is in accord with or works with our path. the path to Buddhahood, our enlightenment, and benefiting others. Even in a smaller sense, if we're looking just to be a good person, or we're trying to stop being bad, is to think how this is encouraging us from this moment, and so on. But also at the same time is the vigilance, and vigilance is making sure that what we're doing is not deviating or making a mistake, looking the wrong way or thinking the wrong thoughts, or these sorts of things. So there is a part of this which is, it sounds pretty heavy, and in one sense initially one's, restraining oneself from one's actions, keeping mindful and so on. And I did say before that a part of that is actually like when we're talking to children, we know not to swear, and so on. So in fact, many ways, actually, it's not so hard. It's just that we need to keep on the ball. Especially like, for instance, Janet, who used to be in the civil service, and she actually had to have this all the time. She being aware of the fact that she was a public face, a public representative. And likewise, we have the same thing, which is, as Buddhists or as aspiring bodhisattvas, to think we're representing Buddhism, we're representing the Bodhisattva path, we're representatives, and in like that we have to be mindful of our behavior. We have to be careful of what it is we say and what it is that we do, because anybody who's aware of the fact that we are Buddhist, or even if they later become aware of the fact they're Buddhist, they will then maybe judge Buddhism based upon our activities. So this shows we've really got to be good diplomats as well as good practitioners, right? So it's not just about, and it's not just pretending. So the other thing is also, when we're doing good things, when we're being a good person, is to feel joy about it. So it should be a happy state rather than restrain all the time, thinking this way. The idea, of course, is the joyous effort is to take joy in doing good things, and to feel a lack of joy in those things which are not good. And that's like, okay, well, we can't enforce joy. We can't like just put joy on. It's like, we can all fake it, but that's not the point. Is faking our joy isn't really working for us. Even in the long term, it might work shortly. It might work when we really need to put on a grit, stiff upper lip, smile, right? So those sorts of things are like fine, but what we also need to do is actually find that joy, and we do that through right view, through understanding the Buddha Dharma. When we understand it and we free ourselves from the wrong views, then joy arises naturally when we do good things, and we find that energy. We find the energy to do that. So again, as I said before last time, having right view in understanding Buddha Dharma allows for us to take joy, and makes our journey much easier. And more fluid. Okay, so it sounds initially like, oh well, how on earth we talk about compassion fatigue, and we talk about how can you keep the vigilance up, and it sounds like strain. It's like, well, if our view's correct, then there's no effort. If our view's mistaken, then there's effort involved. If the view's mistaken and there's effort involved, then it can be quite hard work. So we're trying to find a way of changing our view, and by changing our view, we can then bring the practice much more easily into fruition, right? So being aware of where the rigidities are in our views that are preventing us from being able to see things clearly in a way which helps us is one of the purposes of meditation. Right? We're doing the meditation to weaken our mistaken view and to strengthen our correct view through using creative, dynamic intelligence, right? Not just for following scripture, but understanding how it means and getting it to unlock a correct view. So that doesn't mean that we have to believe things that we don't want to believe in. We need to find a way of being able to meet meet our views, but also in a way which is beneficial. So what we're really looking to do is to liberate ourselves, and through liberation of ourselves, liberate others. And we want to do that through empowerment, through understanding, and through kindness, right? So these sorts of things are actually not necessarily bound to rigid belief systems. What they're bound to is actually unpacking our preconceived belief systems. We don't have to reject science. We don't have to reject Buddhism. We can find a balance, and that balance is for us to discover according to our own views. I think the thing that we're saying is that right view isn't one thing. Yeah, there's not just one truth in Buddhism. There are many, many different truths. What there are some ignorances, and those ignorances we've got to remove. Yeah, and one of those ignorances, in one sense, is the idea that there is only one truth. So it's not about saying anyway. Mindfulness, right? So now we're talking about the meditation session, and what we're really talking about is what we're doing what we're talking about in the text right now is what we're doing between the session. What I was trying to do is to explain how this fits in the bigger picture and what meditation is about in terms of what he said so far. So he talks about the foundations of our acting with vigilance. And we did talk about this last week, about the actions of the body, our eyes, where we're looking, if there's something that's very attractive or something that infuriates us, maybe our eyes will give it away, or our gestures, and those sorts of things, or even our limbs, our fingers, our toes, stretching out, facing for instance, in the traditional Tibetan traditional system, it's a mistake not to take one's shoes off when one goes into a temple room, right? So, or into a meditation room. And there was an English monk who was at Rizong Monastery when Geshe Damchola was there in Ladakh. This is in the 1960s, early 60s, 1961, 1962. And this English monk was quite new to Buddhism and kept on forgetting to take his boots off. And the Gecko, the disciplinarian, kept on hitting him with a stick. He got very, very upset. The fact that he kept on being hit with a stick. And then all the monks said, it's very simple, just take your boots off before you go into the prayer hall. The idea is training, yeah. So it's like, come on, you're an adult, you've got to be better than the children, you've got to remember to take your boots off. Anyway, eventually it managed to do that. So likewise, it's like also when we take refuge, then we're not meant to have our feet, the soles of our feet pointing towards a picture of Buddha or towards texts. We're not meant to put text onto the floor. We're not meant to tread over the texts and so on. So these are all ways in which our gestures, or the actions of our limbs and so on, we need to be vigilant about that, right? As well as thinking of others. And again, handling and making use of religious items. So here, Je Rinpoche is talking about the robes that a monk wears or a nun wears, but also anything else that one has. So for instance, I have got nothing to hand, but even one's mala, beads, if one has mala, then not to put it on the floor, to take it into a toilet and so on. So those sorts of things are important. So, and eating and drinking and also accepting drinking and eating, eating and drinking when things are being given to us or accepted for us. And there's an important thing, which is, because this might sound a bit arrogant, but it's not meant that way, is because we are all recognized that we have the opportunity to become a Buddha. There is a part of that which is to say, therefore, if we are path treaders, we're on the path to Buddhahood. And if we're doing that with bodhicitta, with a mind of enlightenment for doing it for all beings, then that is a way of, we could say that we're Buddha's children. Yeah, so we see this Buddha's children and are an object of worship, and this means those practitioners who are on the same journey to Buddhahood. And Buddha made it clear that one of the things that is not acceptable as an offering for food. And although he was primarily talking about the Vinaya, it also extends to Bodhisattva practitioners or Mahayana practitioners, is if people kill an animal to feed you. Yeah, so this is like animal sacrifice. Although normally one thinks about animal sacrifice in terms of offering to a god, it actually, in the same way, is because we recognize practitioners as being high, as because they're engaged in the path, then also killing in order to feed, killing an animal specifically to feed a practitioner is like animal sacrifice. And this is something that we reject, because we recognize the animal has right to life and right not to suffer. And in that sense, there was no consent involved in that animal's life. So it's then best not to do that. So this is one of the times when to reject food that's been offered is okay. Nowadays, of course, many people are like, they ask if we're, what our dietary requirements are, or, even if we're vegan or vegetarian, or whether or not we eat wheat. So we don't normally have to worry about this so much anymore. But in a monastic sense, a monks, even if they're vegetarian and somebody offers them meat, then they're really meant to eat it. Yeah. So there was this one, a couple of other restrictions like that. Obviously, if somebody offers them human meat, then they can say no. Things like that. So then there are also how to behave within a temple or within a religious grounds. And again, this is very much about thinking primarily about monastics. But again, it applies to us as much as lay people. We don't have to just think this is just for monastic people. In terms of when we're walking, where we're going, how we're moving, considering whether or not we're doing that in a correct or an inspiring or in a gentle way. If we're just rushing and barging through people and ignoring their needs just because I'm in a rush, then this is not necessarily great, right? And likewise, in terms of speech, thinking about receiving teachings, thinking about those teachings, conversing with others about those teachings in a way which helps people to connect with their practice, right? Again, and ourselves, we're looking to connect with our practice. He talks about actions of mind, especially particularly to do with sleeping in the middle of the night rather than cogitating too much. But also developing our concentration. This is and doing what we can that will help us, assist us with our meditation session. So primarily, one of the things is they're talked in a later chapter about meditation, but also things like to practice contentment, to be happy with what we have rather than what we unhappy with what we don't have. And keeping a sort of a gentle, non-aggressive, and not subject to our own desires or greed or whatever when it's inappropriate, especially. In fact, really not at all. So then there's also the idea of timing, and this is something which we have to be a little bit sort of careful about. So traditionally, the Buddhism divides the day into 3 sessions and the night into 3 sessions. And these are like sort of the early evening, middle of the night, later night, and then the morning. So it's about what that would be something like 4 hours per session, right? For division. And primarily is like saying you should only sleep in the middle period of the night, which means that we would only be sleeping 4 hours a night. Now, some of us actually find that very easy. Some of us, it's like, it's just really, really, really tough. If we're a monk and we're doing this training and we're also doing a lot of meditation and we're not having to do activity, or we're able just to concentrate on our practice, then our mind actually becomes a little bit less heavy. And then we can actually find ourselves being able to sleep less. But if we're doing physical labor, even as a monk, that's not very easy at all, especially in India, when the Indians, many Tibetans were refugees. Then they were doing farm work and so on, and in that case, 4 hours is very, very difficult indeed. Now, there are some people who say, "Oh, I sleep 4 hours a night," but often that's because they're thinking so much they can't sleep properly. And that's not really what we're talking about either. So it is the case that what we're really saying is, okay, so traditionally, Buddha supposedly slept 4 hours a night. And he encourages that because our life is so precious and we get such a short amount of time that we want to fill it as much as we can. But we also have to recognize, and this is important, I think, that if we are sleep deprived, we begin to go a little bit crazy, and that's no good. Right? So we're not here to be ascetic in the sense of reducing ourselves into a sleep-deprived state where we keep on making huge mistakes and not being able to serve all sentient beings as well as we could. So the idea is to try to think, well, okay, well, maybe if I continue with my practice, or if I can calm my mind or whatever, then maybe I can see a need for less sleep. And that's fine, but you can't just push it. You can't just push and say, okay, I'm only going to have 4 hours. I did try it once, I have to say. And apart from the fact that a lot of the time I was pretty much a zombie, I also tended to snap. And then every time I was like, I sat down, I was like that, and which is just not appropriate. So it's not really very valuable to be able to do that, to push too hard, right? But I guess just said again to us, in terms of our practice, don't push too much, right? What we want to do is to change our view, but we have to be aware of the fact that until that view is changed substantially, we're going to be having to deal with our own luggage. So don't push too much, but don't relax too much, right? Otherwise, there's no practice there. So vigilance, again, this was the idea of talking about another way of doing it in terms of 4 sections, and this one in terms of the basis, which is like we were saying earlier on, the four foundations of mindfulness. I'm now doing this, I'm now doing that, keeping aware of what we're doing, what we're planning to do next, making sure that it's in accordance with what it is I'm doing. And there are Vinaya again, and talk about how to go, how to come, if I'm going out to the town, when I can do it, when's a good time to do it, when's not a good time, and so on. And then also the element of direction, which is if I am going or moving around, where am I going? Is it a suitable place? And in fact, again, there is sort of Je Rinpoche mentions 5 places which we really shouldn't be going to, such as a place that where there's selling mainly for drinking, so like a pub, I guess, or a bar or a wine bar, where what we're going to be doing is we're dealing with people who are not in the best state for meditation, and may well encourage us to not meditate. So those sorts of things are we want to try to be aware of, especially as monks. It's not good to go there. As lay people, it's necessary sometimes for us to go to these places, but we need to remember to try to be set an example as Buddhists, and also as practitioners, as path treaders, how best to be there in those situations. The other 4 places is the palace. Again, the King's Palace really means politics. So it's very easy to get wrapped up into politics, and before we know it, we end up with these incredibly difficult problems which don't help our practice and don't help anybody else. So because we want to help all beings, we often see politics as a way of being able to implement that. But in order to do that as a bodhisattva, actually requires a higher state of mind. So when we're an Arya being, when we have a actually direct insight into emptiness, then we can do that. But before then, it's actually going to cause more trouble for us than good. We've got lots of work to do anyway with just meditation and to get our training done before we start engaging in that sort of thing. Likewise, It doesn't mean we have to sort of reject all politics, but in terms of engaging in politics, like becoming an MP or whatever, then this becomes much more complex for us. So then in terms of then also like abattoirs, you know, where they kill animals and similar. So those sorts of things, generally the idea is to say, if it's going to create questions as to why is a Buddhist practitioner doing there, you know, what are they doing there? It's not a very Buddhist place to be. Then a brothel is another one. So then we have to think, you know, okay, maybe this isn't appropriate. I think Je Tsongkhapa actually mentions two types of abattoir, and one's a bad one and one's a normal one, but I don't really know what the distinction between a bad one and a normal one is. I just avoid abattoirs in general. It's quite easy for me. And then again, time. So time is an element of time in terms of mindfulness and vigilance, is to think about whether or not the activity is appropriate for the time of the day, and also whether or not I'm on time. And remember, we're trying to be considerate, we're trying to think of others, we're trying to set examples. So to be responsible, to be aware, can we be on time? Can I be more of assistance? And likewise, also to have a degree of ability to sort of to point out when somebody could be picked up, when we're in a position of authority or whatever, or in a position of responsibility for people, is to point out, saying, look, you know, you could be on time a bit more often, right? So this is not necessarily aggression. It's primarily to say to try to bring people up a bit. That's all. So then these sorts of things, and then so then the element of actions, which is to look at each action that we do and whether we're intending on doing, and to check in with it, if you like we talked about in before, Geshe Bendawa with his bowl of stones, of black stones and white stones, again to think ideally beforehand rather than retrospect, how, you know, is this the right thing to do? So this is what vigilance is about in terms of between session vigilance. So he says, you know, we need to be mindful of whatever behaviors may take place in the day or night, and mindful is about making sure, not forgetting what it is we're meant to be doing. And again, and then within those, to be vigilant in terms of the way that we're doing them. So this is the idea of saying, I've got to be clear that what I'm doing it correctly. Yeah. So there's a large amount, especially in the Vinaya, especially in the monastic text, concerning looking at regulation. And the reason why they do this isn't for fun or just because of making sure that you know, that Buddhism looks good. The point about it is that by training ourselves in this, our mind becomes more supple. We become more relaxed because we have a sense of freedom from defensiveness. We know that we've done our very best from moment to moment. We've used our time wisely, and we've made correct decisions. And this is the purpose of it. And what that does is it helps us, our mind, become more calm, more serene, less agitated. And through that calmness, that sereneness, we're then able to develop serenity in our meditation sessions, which is an important aspect of being able to develop the powerful mind for overturning our obscuration. Remember, our wrong view that we're trying to get rid of. So this is really necessary. Self-discipline, ethics, sila is one of the 3 higher trainings which I've talked about before, and is everywhere in Buddhism. So this point is to say that what we're really looking at is to say how to engage in sila such that we can develop samatha and jnana, wisdom. Yeah. So then Rinpoche also says your appropriate diet. And what we were talking about earlier on is vigilance of diet, but also not to eat too little. If you eat too little, then you become weak. and you have not enough strength, and it's important to have a healthy body, right? Healthy body is important. So this is especially in terms of saying, oh, I look too big, or I look too, these sorts of things are not correct. It's far better to say what I need to do. I have to be responsible about looking after my body, and therefore I need to eat enough to be able to feed my body correctly before anything else, right? But again, also not to eat too much. One of the problems about eating too much is that we find an increase in our lethargy. So one of the advantages of eating little is we actually have more energy, but the problem about that is the energy, we don't have the strength to back it up, right? Also, it tends to be a bit erratic. It's not centered enough, so it tends to be like a bit too sparky. So the thing is, what we need to do is we have to bring our eating in line with and appropriate for our actions, our activities. And I remember when I was doing a long retreat in Lam Rim, so 9 weeks of retreat, at first I was eating my normal, which is possibly a little bit too much, but I was eating my normal food that was being given to me. But my mind very quickly came down, calm, which was good. But it meant I didn't need to eat so much. And it felt right. I didn't stop eating, but I just ended up with a far, far more subtle mind, control mind. So we do need to be aware of the situations. If we're doing a lot of heavy labor, then we need to eat more. If we're doing less, we need to eat less. Also, if we're thinking a lot for our job, we need to eat a little bit more. But if we're not doing so much thinking, we don't need to eat so much. So one of the things to look at is whether or not we put on too much weight, we lose too much weight, but also in terms of our mind, whether or not it's getting a little bit too scattered high or a little bit too low and tired. These things are often correlating to our physical energy levels, physical energy. And again, I think all of us are probably very good at this, but we should be eating digestible, wholesome food. Far better to eat good food, real food, if you like, rather than fine food, which isn't actually of very, very much value. I remember I was taken to a restaurant in a very posh restaurant from the company. And it felt like that everything had about a pound of butter in it. I don't know that it really did, but it felt that way. And it was like, tasted amazing. I mean, it was delicious, but in the end, you felt like really weird. It did not feel normal. And actually, in many ways, a good healthy diet and fresh vegetables is the best there is anyway. I don't need to persuade any of you. You all think the same way. And again, then he talks about eating appropriate food which does not produce afflictions. And primarily these are things to do with saying those ones which are mixed with drugs or if you start drinking too much alcohol, or those which have poison in them or do other things which then would actually create you to cause trouble. And likewise, in a sense, this can be something as simple as chocolate. If you have a really strong attachment to chocolate, you might start being upset if somebody else doesn't give you the chocolate, right? So in that sense, then it's like, okay, maybe I need to cut down on my dependency on chocolate in this way. So it's not like you should stop eating chocolate, but we need to be aware of whether or not our attachment to a particular food is going to cause us to be jealous or outraged or these sorts of negative afflictions which we want to really cut. That's not relevant to us. So he goes on quite a bit about food. He then talks about we need to be able, he says, if we're finding we have a very strong attachment to this, then what we need to do is to consider about how food, even when it's very nice food and it's been very expensive or cooked very well, once we've ate it, if we were to regurgitate it, we wouldn't think very much of it to eat again. So the purpose of this is not really to suggest that we do that. but to try to diminish our attachment to a particular dish or whatever. We have to think of it really primarily as something just to keep us strong, rather than developing a strong attachment for it. And he says also that, especially if we get if we have a strong attachment to food, or if we're particularly hungry, we can then easily make mistakes when we are how we get the food. We might take it even in a bad way. And he suggests also, for instance, that we can ruin good relationships by fighting with each other, even fathers and sons, he says, fighting with each other for the sake of food, which is just not relevant. It's like saying, in the end, what we need to do is just eat enough to keep alive, nothing else. He suggests, Je Rinpoche says, that kings can even go to war with each other and experience much suffering when their craving for food intensifies. So again, we've got to keep these things in terms of understanding that what we're really trying to do is to diminish our attachment to food, but not to reject food. It's a total mistake to end up with rejecting food. So there's a very nice prayer that Geshe gave us for sort of a grace for saying before we eat, which was taken from Nagarjuna and Shantideva, based on the idea of saying that really I should rely upon food just for keeping my body. But even though to remember those people who've benefacted me by giving me food or giving me money so I can achieve food, those people who've actually helped me, and also those people who've made the food, grown the food, delivered the food, sold the food, cooked the food, all of these people, they're doing all of that work. And for me just to not use this body that's being fed by this food for Dharma practice is to miss out on the ability for them to benefit from my actions, right? So the idea here is, if I can recognize everybody involved in the food chain, including the animals that sacrifice their lives such that I might eat vegetables even, as well as all the work that's put into it, if I can recognize the gift of that, then by engaging in the path, in the spiritual path, they become sponsors and they get some direct benefit. If they feed me and I don't do any, if I just do nothing with my time, then that food, that donation is of no particular value. So it's a good idea for us to think about saying, when we eat, to remember and recollect those workers and so on who've offered us this. Even if they've been paid, they still had to do that work, such that we now can use this. We can now use this to help us in our practice. And Shantideva talks about saying, and also remember, we're a community. We're not just a person here. There's also all the microorganisms, all of those within us who depend upon that food. And therefore, likewise, when we're thinking about that, then it's not just us, it's also them that we're helping, we're feeding them. And that way is maybe by the fact that I'm able to sustain them, who they're currently in my body, maybe by feeding them later, I might be able to teach them Dharma. So you're establishing, if you like, establishing a relationship through food that's beneficial, rather than just not mindful or not unaware. So then Je Rinpoche talks about sleeping. And again, we've talked a little bit about saying, well, we have to be a bit careful about not becoming waking zombies, but at the same time, he explains Nagarjuna's friendly letter. He says that we should basically not waste time even when we're asleep. And Je Rinpoche expands on this to say there are times for both you know, as he said, I've been teaching about both meditation session and between sessions. And remember, sleep is between sessions. So it's not as if we can ignore it. So how should we sleep? How should we actually sleep? And he says, you know, obviously he says we should only be sleeping for one portion a night. But if we find that hard, what we want to do is to well, he says specifically when we go to sleep, we should wash our feet and then enter our bedroom or our sleeping room. We should sleep. We should lie on our right hand side, placing the left leg upon the right, and sleep like a lion. So this is the same posture that was you see Buddha statues in when he died. He slept. He felt he died in this position. And the reason is that on your side, on your right hand side, is actually keeps you a little bit more awake than if you're on your back or on your front. So and being on your left side is a little bit more dangerous to your heart. So there are actual good physiological reasons for doing it, but by keeping yourself balanced prevents you from going into a deep slumber. And if you go into a deep slumber, then if you're Ben, this one, then you end up making a lot of noise, which isn't particularly very valuable for the rest of sentient beings. So it's better really to try not to do that, to disturb other people, right? So also by having a little bit not going too deep in our sleep, it helps us with our dreams and our sleep state to keep more mindful and be more aware. Now, remember, this Lam Rim text is not completely separate from Tantra. In the Tantric tradition also, there are many ways of using sleep for dream yoga, for establishing dream yoga. Dream yoga is really where we use our dreams as meditation sessions. So we can then develop meditation and meditate while we're asleep. And that's quite advanced. So right now what we're talking about is not how to meditate while we're asleep, but just how to help assist with our sleep. And likewise, while we fall asleep, the idea of being illuminated by, so a sense of illumination of Buddha's teachings or kindness. And this can help to keep a positive mind. Mindfulness again is to notice, is to keep aware of the fact that now we've done a good day of work. Now it's time to sleep and start again to see if I can do again another good day work. There is a point, which is if we do this too energetically, then the mindfulness energy itself will prevent us from sleeping, which is not the point. We are actually trying to sleep. So anybody who's tried to sleep, if you know, it doesn't work very well. So we have to be a little bit gentle here, not try too hard again. And likewise, as we're sleeping, is just to keep still keeping our vigilance, making sure that our mind remains, doesn't gravitate towards negative thoughts. And likewise, he says a nice way of thinking about it is we should sleep like a deer. Deer, when they sleep, they're still aware. They can hear what's going on around them, and they'll respond dramatically, even when they're asleep. So the idea really primarily is to say some lamas have said, for instance, to recollect that I might not wake up. Every time we go to sleep, there is a chance that we might not wake up. Now, this is not to cause fear, but to recognize that each day that we have is one of those days is going to be our last day. So it helps us to think, you know, oh, okay, well, today I've done all I can. Tomorrow I will also do what I can. So in that sense, it's not about, we're not here to make fear of death. We shouldn't be if we're doing well, we don't need to fear death. What we need to do is just to recognize that it's there, and help that in our practice. So again, if it doesn't help, it's best not to do that, right? So we're looking primarily at establishing this idea of developing our mind more than anything else. So that takes us to the end of chapter 5 about the meditation session and between the meditation session. And we've got half an hour, and it's probably worthwhile going into chapter 6, which is about refuting misconceptions of meditation. There's a lot of this is going to I don't want to skip through it too much, but a lot of this is really about the idea of saying meditation is not thinking, and or the only meditation really is just about keeping our mind calm. So one of the words that Je Rinpoche uses here, or in terms of the way in which it's been translated, is stabilizing meditation. Stabilizing meditation is when we bring our mind into calmness, like doing breath awareness, where we just concentrate on the breath and nothing else. And that is also known as shine, or calm abiding, or developing calm abiding. So many different words for this, or samatha. So he says, you know, there's the idea of saying, that a common view is that we should really, when we meditate, we should be doing stabilizing meditation rather than repeatedly analyzing our object, thinking about our object with discerning wisdom, because that is done in study. And his response is, that's just rubbish. I mean, he actually says, they translated to nonsensical chatter of somebody utterly ignorant. So I think it's pretty heavy. Then he quotes Maitreya. He says, attention is based on prior study, but wisdom, which takes reality as its object, arises from your cultivation of proper attention. So he says that Maitreya is saying that you should use wisdom that comes from reflection to attend properly to the meaning of what it is you've studied, and it's from this that arises wisdom. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit, because it sounds a little bit complicated, and it's not. It's something we've already talked about a bit, which is the idea of saying, when we become familiar with something, when we get an idea about something, such as death awareness, or the precious human rebirth, or loving kindness, and so on, and we understand the steps of meditation in the process, from text or from listening or whatever. So when we understand it intellectually, that's great. That gives us the basis for our meditation. Our meditation practice is making it real, right? Is turning it from understanding it as a concept into making it something that informs us every moment. So we're not just talking about understanding these things. We're saying, I feel it. I feel my death actually informs my actions every moment of my life, and when when I'm aware of that, then I need to refresh it, right? So having got the understanding, I then repeat it through meditation. So then the purpose of this is to say, we have both our session on meditating on something like impermanence or death awareness. We use analytical meditation, creative intelligence, to develop that understanding, that insight that gives us, makes it real, gives us our realization. And then we use stabilizing meditation to try to develop that, to make it stronger and stronger in us. So he says we do this, we using our own self-awareness, our own mindfulness of our practice as we're doing our meditation session, is to think, okay, I'm going to die. And like, okay, well, what does that mean? I mean, how is that affect? And then actually get a sense of it. Okay, well, that really means I don't want to waste my time anymore, right? I don't want to waste a moment of my time. And then when we get a strong sensation, then to use our stabilizing meditation to keep it, to grow it, to make it stronger, to make ourselves more determined in it. Yeah. And likewise, when we're listening to text, I'm sure many of you have heard most of this Lam Rim before, and it's like when we're listening to Lam Rim text, sometimes there's like, we can use this listening, it doesn't matter if it's me or His Holiness or anybody, we can use this to say, this is like a meditation. So again, when I hear the words, I can use this opportunity right now to develop it, to strengthen it, to make it real, and then to allow for it to make an impact on my life. And by doing that, then we're actually bringing the practice right into the moment. And Je Rinpoche says, you know, to claim that all meditation really is just stabilizing meditation is rather like taking a single grain of barley, I don't have one here, but a single grain of barley, and claiming this is all the barley grains there are, which is really not the point. So yes, it's important. Stabilizing meditation is important, but all of these things, the whole of the Lam Rim is made up of a series of meditations for us to develop, to help us with our wrong view, help us with our mind, our ignorance, and to eliminate it. Yeah. So it's not like, and then again, he'll talk about this in a minute. So, so I won't say anything yet. Ah, here we are, right. So straight away, there we are. So there's an objection, which is what is determined through study and reflection is not intended for meditation, but merely for promoting knowledge and eliminating others' misconceptions. Therefore, when you meditate, you must meditate on something unrelated to your study and reflection. This is a real objection that somebody made, another academic Buddhist. And Je Rinpoche says, this is incoherent. It's like showing a horse one race course and then taking it to another to race. Completely stops, destroys the process of understanding how these things work. So in terms of the whole basis, and again, something we talked about before, is to say that there is a correspondence in terms of our practice and what it is that where we're going and our goal. We are looking to take compassion and enhance it to the point that we become Buddhas. We're looking at taking our insight and enhancing it to the point where we become Buddhas. So this is not like some sort of like we're doing one thing and then something else happens. And likewise with our meditation and our understanding of meditation is, this is based on exactly what we're learning. We can spend 3 years meditating on intolerance or tolerance, patience practice, in our, not just sitting in our cushion, we're going down, walking through the streets, going to work, using every opportunity to look at tolerance or intolerance, understanding it, patience practice. How does it work? Where is it from? What does it mean? This is meditation. If we're doing it in a way which is focused, saying this is what I'm planning on doing, then it's meditation. If we're just a random thoughts and it goes here and then we're thinking about whether or not Harry got her Christmas card or whatever, then that's just thinking, right? So the point about it is we're using this opportunity. Meditation is where we're trying to bring out, to inform ourselves in a way that is meaningful and powerful to overturn our wrong views. So sorry, I possibly got a bit intense, but this is what he's sort of implying is that people who say meditation is just being calm, just letting the mind drift, then that's not really very valuable. He then quotes Dhammamitra, Clear Words commentary on the same thing. He says, meditating is making the mind take on the state or the condition of the object of meditation. So again, he's just repeating, I sort of preempted this, which was saying, if we're studying the object of meditation is loving kindness, we're making it take on that condition. We're actually learning how to take on the condition of loving kindness in our mind. This is meditation. So he says, for example, here we are, I didn't even have to say that. Yeah, meditating on compassion and meditating on faith means the mind is made to develop these qualities. So he says, in one way, another way of talking about that is conditioning. So we condition our mind to become compassionate. So anyway, so there he does get he's quite heated by the idea that meditation is just calmness, and he points out many texts from Shantideva, many of the sutras where they talk about meditating on compassion and so on. And he says, well, what does that mean if meditation is just calmness, right? So then he says, for instance, a compendium of training, which is Vinaya, therefore meditate continuously on any distribution, protection, purification, or enhancement of your body, resources, or merit. This is part of the idea of what it is we're trying to develop as a monk or a nun. But he's saying, well, this indicates that meditation includes any of these performances of these four practices of a monastic. And therefore, don't think that meditation is limited. But, and I think this is sort of what he'd also say, there's quite a lot of other things that are out there nowadays which are called meditation, which really aren't meditation. Sort of like guided meditations where you go on a journey and you're by a seaside and you can smell the air and so on. There's not really very much value to that because it's not developing any quality of mind. It doesn't help you with your understanding realization. So you can go to YouTube and listen to these very nice, they're very gentle, sort of guided, they're called guided meditations, and they're like, you know, and now we can hear, you know, the palm trees whistling in the breeze, and there's a waiter coming, bringing you a nice cocktail. And it's like, okay, well, what does that do? It just makes you want to get a holiday, right? It's not going to help us with our practice. So we have to be a bit aware of what we're doing, which is actually to do with sustaining these qualities of mind, developing these qualities of mind that make us better people, right? Make us the best we can possibly be. So then also he says another complaint is, or another objection is that any conceptual thought involves apprehensions or signs of true existence, and thus prevents enlightenment. In other words, we need to cut all conceptual thought. In order to achieve enlightenment, all conceptual thought must be cut, right? And we can hear lots of people saying this nowadays still. And he said this is a huge problem in Tibet. So it was a problem 1300 years ago. It's still a problem today in terms of it not necessarily being of any benefit. And he says, not in fact, what one of the problems about it and why he feels so strongly about this is because discerning meditation, discerning wisdom, being able to develop critical analysis, which is being able to recognize what something actually means and being able to argue the case for it, is actually diminished by just engaging in non-conceptuality. So we've got to work on the idea of saying, if I don't know what Buddhahood is, if I don't know what enlightenment is, if I don't know what impermanence is, being non-conceptual is not going to bring it to me. Right? So we've got to be aware of the fact of saying, if I want to know what a Buddhahood is, I have to think about it. I have to meditate on it. If I want to understand loving kindness, I've got to bring it out in myself. I can't just imagine that non-conceptual thought is somehow going to make me very, very compassionate. I have to develop that. So this is really what he's saying is the danger of imagining that just non-conceptuality is of value is missing the point, which is that it doesn't help connect but also it helps us weaken our critical analysis. Now, critical analysis doesn't mean being critical. It means being able to differentiate and understand the distinctions between various different points of view, and being able to unpick and repack, unpick and repack. So a bit like, in fact, he mentions it probably in the next page, somebody who's working with gold, assaying gold, and in refining gold, the quality of gold, breaks it apart, puts it back together again, gets rid of the rubbish, breaks it apart, hammers it out, folds it back together again, uses mercury, and removes the mercury, all these different things. This really is the purpose of analytical meditation. Non-conceptuality removes our basis of skill for that. So in a sense, we've got to be aware that there are times when we want to develop non-conceptual states of mind. This happens later on when we're doing our stabilizing meditation, right? But to think, therefore, that's all we need is a mistake, because we lose scope, we lose sight, and we lose clarity about of what it is we're looking at. So this is not included in Lam Rim, but it is included in Je Rinpoche's Guru Yoga. There's sort of 4 types of wisdom. There's vast, fast, clear, fast, and deep. So vast is understanding all the complexities and different things going on. Fast is being very quick, speedy, getting there very quickly. Clear is being able to see very clearly all the different aspects of something without any flaws, without any confusion. And deep is understanding exactly how it links up. So these sorts of things, these depend upon us using analytical meditation, not just non-conceptual or whatever. We have to use this ability to assess. And by doing that, it helps us develop. So somebody says, okay, well, you're saying there are 2 types. There's analytical and there's non-analytical stabilizing meditation. What's the difference? And he says, analytical is really when we're working on all of these different topics, death awareness, impermanence, karma, all of these things, and bodhicitta. And this is because what we need to do is he says here, they've translated it, we need an awareness that is long-lasting, forceful, and capable of changing the mind. So what I was saying, making it real, right? So it's the same thing. We're talking about actually making it inform us. So this is why we need to have this, because otherwise we've got nothing to oppose our faults, such as disrespect or laziness, and or so many others. Doubt, for instance. Doubt's a really big one. So some doubt is healthy to be not just to take it as read, to accept it, to actually look at it, to push, but then to have to persist with doubt because one doesn't want to face the truth. This is not so good. So the point about it is to clear doubts through using critical analysis, but not just to accept things at face value on the pretext of I don't want to have any doubt. So we need to be able to feel open, free, enabled, empowered to look. At the same time, what we need to do is then look, and then to establish a doubtlessness, a clarity of mind about this, and then to say and let that change us. Right, in a good way, not yeah, I think you know that. So, and then stabilizing meditation is this serenity where we focus, placing our mind on one object of meditation without any movement. So focus, completely calm, easy focus on any object, and we can stay there as long as we like. And this is basically produces a mental flexibility or fluidity In fact, he uses the term moistness at one point, which is to do the same sort of idea, which is a mind that is effortless at placing itself on something. This is a mental flexibility, which we absolutely need in terms of being able to have enough to overturn some of these deep-rooted wrong views that we have. So then he also says, well, some people say, yeah, well, okay, fair enough. But if you're a scholar, you only need to do academic meditation. But if you're a practitioner, you just do stabilizing meditation. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, okay, which is sort of interesting. He says, no, that's not crazy, because both must do both. The scholar has to achieve stabilizing meditation, such as serenity, and the practitioner must also pursue such practices as faith in the teacher and so on. So both of them require these. So what's interesting is, of course, what that suggests is that he recognizes that there are scholars and practitioners as being different. We don't need to be a scholar to be a practitioner. We don't need to be a practitioner to be a scholar. But what we do need, if we want to make a difference in our lives, is we need to meditate, and we need to use our minds, and we need to develop our minds to a point where we actually have some realization, right? So that's important. We don't need to be intellectual. We don't need to give up intellectuality. What we need to do is to work on changing our minds. And that's separate from being a great academic, right? So that's important. It's sort of interesting. It's implied, it's only implied. He doesn't go into the specific details of the distinction between a practitioner and a scholar here. He says also, not only that, but because by using our discerning wisdom and by able to rely upon different texts and inspirations and thoughts and creative imagination, we develop a really strong understanding. And not only that, but also life is put into the words that we've otherwise read. So what we're looking to is to change what could otherwise be rather dry text into something that we can really relate to and feel in our hearts. And that's what's so beautiful about this. So so he says some people with very small understanding of meditation, they might say that if you do too much analysis with discernment and a sort of thinking too much, then it will hinder your concentration, which is sustaining a single point of meditation. So you can't achieve firm concentration. And he says, concentration really is about being able to fix your attention on a single object of meditation. If you can't do that, then then it won't develop. It won't. If you try to achieve it while thinking about many things. But so what he's saying is that. If you don't have mindfulness, if you don't have the mindfulness, or if you like the vigilance at first, to even be able to think about something and stay on that thought, right? So if, for instance, we're wanting to think about, I'm going to meditate on loving kindness, and I'm going off thinking about something else, such as the postman or whatever, or Harry and her Christmas card, then essentially. In that case, then he says, I agree. If your meditation is so bad that you can't even keep focused on the object, then definitely you need to work on stabilizing your mind a little bit, right? Because otherwise you're just wasting your time. However, if you are able to sustain your meditation on loving kindness or on impermanence or whatever, then you've got to be able to do that first. So you've got to also develop that, and don't be confused. So as an early starter, definitely, if you're really lost and you just can't even keep your mind focused on something, you need to do some basic stabilizing, like breath awareness. Otherwise, you definitely need to establish analytic meditation to help bring focus and meaning to your practice. And here he says, and this is why I thought he'd said it, when a skilled smith repeatedly heats gold and silver in a fire, washes them with water, purifying them with defilements and residues, the gold and silver then becomes very soft and pliable. And then they can be transformed into whatever ornaments you want. So likewise, by using our wisdom, by using our discernment, our analytical meditation, we can help assist our mind by removing the faults, such as the afflictions, recognizing, being able to change our wrong view. And by changing our wrong view, we can then develop the powerful concentrations that will actually change the universe. Yeah. So we've got to work on this idea of saying that really we've got to use it, we've got to have those, we've got to have access to those analytical meditations to really start making a difference to our lives. But if we're not even able to establish basic from 1 minute to the next, concentrating on an object of compassion, then we need to really work on that first. But then also one would want to look at doing some in creating merit and also purification practice, such as Vajrasattva mantra or prostrations or mandala offerings and so on. So there's still plenty to do. Yeah. So he says that the two initial problems in our focus and our understanding is laxity, where our mind begins to go to sleep, and excitement, where our mind begins to spark. And these are the two primary obstacles, initial obstacles to our development of serenity, to stabilizing meditation. He says that these two are far more easily eliminated, in fact, very easily eliminated once we've destroyed our wrong views. Yeah. So once we have faith in the triple gem, once we understand, once we have faith in the path, when we have faith of understanding the thoughts of impermanence and suffering and so on, then it's very easy to eliminate. And he says specifically that laxity is easily the tie-in for removing dullness in our meditation is to do with recognizing the qualities of the three jewels. And in terms of removing excitedness, he mentions the thoughts of awareness of the problem of suffering, the thoughts of suffering, samsara, and death awareness. So Geshe-la said, he said this in relationship to this was actually, there's two really powerful meditations we learned very early on. In fact, the next section is going to be one of them, which is the idea of the precious human body, recognizing how amazing it is that we're alive in a human body, able to meditate. And he said one of the great side effects or purposes of this meditation is not only does it make us want to use our time more recognize the value of our time in terms of the opportunities we have, but it also raises our mind. It makes us a little bit happier. It's like, wow, I've got this incredible, ability. I've got a human body. I can meditate. I can do all these wonderful things. And so therefore it brings our mind up. Whereas death awareness, I'm going to die, it's inevitable, helps us also focus on not wasting our time, but it tends to bring us down a bit. Right. So when we're looking at our mood, remember, we're being mindful or vigilant about our mood. If our mind is beginning to get too high or scattered, then we need to think a little bit about death awareness. Whereas if our mind's too low and we get a little bit tired, then it's good to think about precious human rebirth. Yeah. And in a sense, especially if we find ourselves in even slight cycles of well, people talk about bipolar, which is very, very different. I mean, it's very dramatic, but sometimes we might see ourselves on a bit of a roller coaster, and then it's like, okay, when I'm at the high of the roller coaster, I want to try and drop it down a bit, and when I'm at the low of the roller coaster, I can bring it up a bit, like that, and that helps. And Je Rinpoche says is also true as well as the precious human rebirth, also can do that with thinking about the qualities of the three jewels, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or the amazingness of the Buddha, of the path, of the spiritual path. So again, these are positive meditations. Whereas karma, karma, the suffering of samsara, death awareness, this would bring us down a bit. So we can use these two, right, to help us in terms of thinking about where our mind is, to keep it strong, stable, and inspired, and remaining inspired. So we're aware of these things, and we can use these things directly according to our current state of mind in order to benefit ourselves and to benefit all sentient beings. So he says, well, even when you've eliminated laxity, tiredness, and also excitement, then you'll still need to sustain analytical meditations. And this is because essentially one of the things we're saying again is we've got to keep these our realizations, we have to keep them fresh. And that doesn't happen at first anyway, until quite a way in the path. This doesn't happen naturally. So we have to really be working at it. So the general path is like fivefold, and you've got accumulation, preparation, insight, meditation, and then a body and no more learning. Okay, so accumulation, which is where we are, if we're there at all, is the first, and that's where we're accumulating merit. There's a basic practice. And preparation, and then insight is where we actually have our first direct understanding of emptiness. And then the path of meditation is from Bodhisattva Bhumi levels number 2 through to 8. So in those paths, we need to still do analytical meditation, right? Even when we're at the path of 8th level, and we don't need to do that anymore because we've done all the work that we need to. We just need to carry on developing other things. But we can, that's quite a way away, right? So we don't need to worry about that too much. So he says also, and this is actually something, again, I didn't know it was in the Lam Rim, but he says again, success is more difficult for those who contemplate on their own rather than it is for those who transform their minds in a classroom. And he's saying exactly this, is that don't just think about transforming your mind when you're sitting on your cushion doing your practice. Use a class, use a talk, use these opportunities right now to develop, to transform your mind, right? So you might find it hard sometimes to listen to me, but if you do, or if I hesitate or I pause, it gives you an opportunity to think, okay, well, maybe I can use this time to develop my mind a bit more, right? So there's never any need to be to think, oh, this is boring, I've heard this before, instead of thinking, okay, yeah, I know all this, I heard this so many times. No, Ben's nothing like His Holiness when he teaches. It's amazing. But it's like, okay, but I can still use it to remind myself of how beautiful His Holiness was or whatever, and then to develop that and think, yes, I still need to develop my understanding of meditation, of precious human rebirth, of the importance of the Lama and so on, and my dedication to the path of enlightenment. He also says, it's a mistake to think, okay, well, I've got to go and do my practice, which I've said many, many times. I have to say, or I need to do some meditation. It's like, well, what means you're not? Why aren't you practicing now? What's the difference? We're meant to be practicing all the time, not just like some sitting there 15 minutes saying, oh, mani padme hum, right? So we're meant to be doing it all the time. In fact, there's a case, a friend of mine who's like a teacher, and she was like, oh, I never get to do much practice. And Islam said, what do you mean? You're a teacher? And she said, yes. And he said, well, you're doing so much practice already, right? So it's like this idea of, you know, what you're doing every day is practice. It's wonderful what you're doing. And that idea of saying, okay, well, you know, I'm not doing my, is like more of a problem for us than it is for anything else. We've got to recognize that what we're doing every moment is an opportunity to practice, not just sitting down on a cushion saying, "Om Mani Padme Hum." Yes, it's good to do meditation, to do formal meditation. Yes, we need to try and develop a calm mind, a stabilizing meditation. But that's not where the practice stops or starts. And then he says, you know, likewise, he quotes somebody who says as a saying, I mean, maybe a Tibetan saying, there's a time for study and there's a time for practice. He says, this is making a mistake, that the time for study isn't time for practice, or the time for practice isn't the time for study, right? We've got to recognize that we're doing both. We never stop we don't want to ever stop practice. Anyway, he said, those people who understand this, there are so few of them that maybe it's a good idea to really develop some more thought about this, because it's very easy to get confused. But basically, essentially, anybody who's got any training will say, you practice now, right now, and now, and that's how to think about it. And then also, yes, do your meditations when we can. We meditate anywhere. We can meditate on a bus, we can do that. Calming meditation's hard if it's a very noisy bus, but we can still use it for death awareness if we're worried about the driver. Or whatever, we can use our time. We can think, you know, okay, this is a good opportunity to develop loving kindness or whatever. Yeah. That's the Refuting Misconceptions of Meditation. How are we doing on time? Okay, it's not too bad. So the next week we'll do is the Precious Human Rebirth. Okay, Human Life of Pleasure. There's chapter 7. If I'm still here, where I hope to be. So then, other than that, I think today we've done very well, and so we want to dedicate any benefits from the teaching or listening towards us being able to develop a continual practice on the Bodhisattva path, seeing ourselves as being able to achieve enlightenment, and seeing no reason why not to walk that way. That any benefits whatsoever is given to enlightenment for all sentient beings through this practice. Yeah. Okay. So while we're here, and we've got like 5 minutes, we could just do a couple of minutes of meditation. That's my timer, because I went over last week. So let's just either breath awareness or to think about a commitment to practice